please relieve yourself from the pressure of trying to come across as an amazing storyteller, because people are not interested in fact, if you get told that you're an amazing storyteller, then that's the wrong outcome of your communication. What you have to be able to hear from people is, you made a very relevant point. I'm going to do what you said. I think that makes a lot of sense. If you get complimented on your being an amazing storyteller, that means the focus was you and your flamboyancy, not the point you made. Resonance only happens with things that happen all the time, because those are our daily experiences.
That's Anjali Sharma. She's the founder of Narrative, the business stories, and spent the last decade helping clients like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook tell more engaging and transformative stories. She's also the author of Strategic Storytelling, Why Some Stories Drive Your Success at Work, but Others Don't. So you'll learn 1, why amazing storytelling isn't the end goal. 2, the critical question that generates more effective stories. And 3, why to think like a journalist and not a novelist. And if you want a quick summary write-up of these takeaways, I recommend you sign up for the free Gold Nugget email newsletter at awesomeatyourjob.com. I'm Pete Mikitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Anjali. Anjali, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to chat storytelling, and I'd love it if you could kick us off by telling us a particularly surprising or counterintuitive discovery you've made about us humans and story over the course of your research and working with clients.
I think, the most wonderful thing about storytelling is that no matter where you go, there is room for storytelling everywhere, whether you go into someone's life, whether you go into someone's work, whether you go into relationships with your family. But the most effective storytelling is the one that actually really deep dives into a particular domain. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that what I used to think, roughly about 12 years ago about storytelling is everything, it's everywhere. And that was the beauty of it. But it was also the disadvantage of it, because you could start telling stories to people who work in corporations, which is where I largely kind of play the work that I do. And they would be like, yeah, it's a great story, but how does it matter to me? So I think the hyper-targetedness of the story is what makes it resonate, where people listen to it and go, oh my God, that's exactly what happens to me. That thing that people say can only come when you really target the story to the audience that you're telling the story to. Stories are great, but the best storytellers know how to flex their narrative according to who they're telling the story to. So I think my biggest discovery was that.
Intriguing. Well, could you give us a really quick example of what's a generic story that's not really going to wow someone versus what is that same story sound like in a micro-targeted way?
Okay, so I think I'd like to sort of make a little correction to that, because even though the story can go, wow, we don't tell just for them to be like, wow. We want people to get up and take an action. And it is not necessary that whatever I will say wow to, I will actually act upon. I'll demonstrate this to you. So say I want people to challenge the status quo for better innovation. And I say, we must challenge the status quo. And I tell them the story of the founder of Body Shop, Anita Roddick. And Anita Roddick tells this story. She's no more, but when she was around, she told this story to a magazine interview in which she says that, when I was all of 12 years old, I remember the day when my father passed away, and my mother in the house was cleaning the floor, and there was this bucket of dirty water next to her. And she, looked quite sort of anxious and stressed. But a large part of her anxiety and stress was coming from the fact that my parents didn't get along with the local priest. And she wasn't sure that my father was going to get a Catholic funeral or not. And a few minutes later, the doorbell rang and my mother opened the door and the priest was standing there. And the priest looked at my mom and said, "You're very lucky. We've decided to give your husband a Catholic funeral." And my mother picked up the dirty water and splashed it onto the priest. Now, when you're brought up with a mother like that, you would challenge status quo because for her, as a Catholic, it was right to get her father to get that funeral. It wasn't a favor that the priest was doing. Now, a lot of people get moved by that story and they go, wow, and amazing. But as soon as you walk out of that place where I have told you the story, you're walking out with a colleague of yours, you would say, it's a lovely story. But if I did that to my boss, I don't think I'll have my job. I'll lose my job. So it's not, a lot of the stories get like amazing, but they don't get an action in the right direction. Therefore, you have to choose the story very, very correctly because a job of a corporate professional is to remember that more important than the remarkability of the story, that this is an amazing story, is the resonance of the story. Resonance of the story will drive an action. Remarkability will give you claps.
I like that a lot. That's a really handy distinction. And I think it's possible to go a whole lifetime without making that distinction because the claps feel good. You say, I'm a master storyteller. People, like, they cry, they applaud, they tell me I'm amazing. If you're a speaker, they keep telling their friends and I keep getting booked. But in terms of if you're being after a specific activity or action from your audience, that's not adequate.
Absolutely. So, my success in a corporate world is not determined by the amount of claps and tears I get in a boardroom. It's determined by how I moved people to take the action in the right direction and how much innovation we get, how we enhance the productivity, how we motivate people to come up with the best possible campaign next. So I think that's a very important distinction. You're absolutely right.
And then I guess as specifically that context in terms of if you're just looking to make phenomenal content that gets a lot of podcast downloads, or even if it's like a full-blown movie or something, then a wow can be fine. But if we're after a particular action on the part of the people we're telling it to, then yes, that's one key thing to look out for is, can they receive that? Is it relatable? So lay it on us. How do we go through a process by which we can craft stories that are effective at bringing about the action taking we'd like from the people we're telling the stories to?
See, we've kind of, over the last 12 years or so, tried to make this approach extremely practical, simply because of the reason that if I walked into a corporate boardroom and I asked people, or into any workspace and asked people, it's like, what is it that is your biggest challenge? And almost everyone will say time, right? The really traditional format of story and the creative format of story that actually relies on high character, high emotions, kind of built over time. You write, you go away, you let your creative juices flow. In corporations and workplaces, we don't have time. So the way I look at it is like this. Before even you tell a story, I say to people, the audience that you're talking to, first determine, are you influencing them or you are inspiring them? Those are two very different things. I mean, if I'm going to be speaking to the board or I'm going to be speaking to the senior leadership team, I need to influence them. But if I'm speaking in a town hall and getting 450 staff members to join an AI upskilling program, then I need to inspire them. So the key way to differentiate whether I'm inspiring or influencing is, am I asking these people to take an action that affects many people, or am I asking them to take an action that just affects them? If it is affecting many people, like let's adopt that, buy that new technology, it's going to affect many people. That's an influence decision. But if I'm asking people to go and join this 1 week upskilling AI hackathon that we've got, then that's an individual's decision that I'm going to go and join it, right? It's a little bit like getting people to be fit, getting people to read more. These are individual decisions. I'm not disrupting an ecosystem. It's my individual decision. Those are primarily inspirational messages. So very simply, how do I target the story right? You first think, am I influencing? Am I inspiring? If I'm influencing, I'm asking people to take an action, make a decision around thing that sort of influences, has an effect on many people. But if it's inspirational message, it's likely to be an individual who's going to have to take that action. Okay, once I've determined that, very simply, I go, if it is inspiration, then I have to give them a nudge to a new identity, right? Because what we often do is we give people goals. But I learned this from James Clear in his book, The Atomic Habits. And then I brought that learning into storytelling. When we talk about goals, for example, writing a book is a goal. But why do people write a book? Because they want to be called authors. That's a new identity they want for themselves. Running a marathon is a goal, but being called a marathoner is an identity. People want to be known like that. So when you are developing an inspirational message, you have to give nudge to a new identity. If I bring it down to the corporate world, I'll give you another example. When I bring it down to the corporate world, we worked on a program back in 2016 where we were asked to build a story around a factory that was going to become a smart factory with automation, robotics, etc. And the whole proposition of that story was productivity. And I was like, this is not going to work for people on the ground. This is not inspirational for them, right? So we built a new identity for them, supervisors of robots. Because somebody's got to program them, somebody's got to charge them, somebody's got to roster them. And do you want to be the supervisors of robots? And that was inspirational for them. So that's how you kind of look at an inspirational message. And then when you come towards the influence style of messaging, I think your hyper targetness comes from really looking at three areas. Most messages that are influential have a story that anchors on time, which is efficiency. So can you make a proposition for being more efficient? Or they come to an image or a reputation, which is, can this story help build better image or a reputation? And then lastly, if you're working for a profit making company, which most people are, am I able to, through this story, save money or make money? So I often joke around and say, what is the TIM you're angling? TIM, time, image, money. So if you want an influential story that influences, then time, image, money are my anchors. But if I'm building an inspirational story, then a nudge to a new identity.
I think this is a fantastic distinction between inspiring or influencing. And I'm reminded of, I think in my early days, I was doing consulting for a strategy consulting firm, Bain, and we would make these slides that were so dense with, numbers, data, charts, like all these stuff. And effectively, we were influencing corporate executives and boards in terms of take this course of action and you will see tremendous profit. Like that was always, we talked a lot about our story. What's our story? And basically that was always the story. Like, hey, do this thing we say and you're going to make a lot of money if you boil it down. And so those slides had a whole lot of data, a whole lot of charts to paint a compelling picture that was, hey, here's the proof, here's the evidence, here's the argumentation, like a debate, that this is in fact the optimal pathway relative to your alternatives. But then at the same time, on my downtime, I'd be watching TED Talks and I think, man, their slides look so much cooler and more beautiful and inspiring than what we do. I felt like we spent all these time on these slides and I thought, and they don't feel as awesome as the TED Talkers slides. What's up? And I think this is a really handy way to think about it. It's like we are attempting to accomplish completely different objectives. If you trot out 20 fancy data charts to your TED audience, they're like, yeah, okay, that wasn't very much fun for us. Thanks. And vice versa. If I just showed a picture of a seed in a hand to a board, it's like, all right, I hope you've got some data coming because this isn't going to cut it for long.
Exactly. Oh my God, you sort of distilled it beautifully. And I love the fact that I have taken you back to your some time in your career, because that is exactly what resonance is. I'm reminding you of an experience you have already had. And when that happens, you know that what I'm saying is resonating with you. So you're absolutely right. The objectives are very, very different. And that's where the hyper targetness works really well. I'll add one little piece of information. There's always this sort of war between the technicality of what we do and the emotions that are embedded in the way we communicate. And what I have learned is that time, image, and money, although seems like a very transactional way of influencing, in fact, rooted in it is an emotional thing. Look at that boardroom and see all those people who are seated there, right? Their next career move depends on whether they are making that company efficient, whether they're making that company profitable, which is money, and whether they are protecting the reputation of the organization or not, or they're building the reputation of the organization or not. So I used to think, why is it so transactional and so dry and distilled in influence area? But then when I started looking at the people sitting there, I was like, no, this is also emotional because their next career step is dependent on those three things. So their connection comes from that. Leaning upon the definition of connection from Dr. Brene Brown, the exchange of energy that happens when people feel seen, heard, and valued. When those people sit in that boardroom and you tell them a story that anchors itself on time, image, and money, they feel seen, heard, and valued because that is what their job is all day in and out, to make more profit for the company, to enhance the reputation image of the company, and to make sure they're efficient all the time. In inspiration, a nudge to the identity, new identity is what's the connection for the person who's listening to you.
Yeah, that's really resonant. And it's funny, like if you applied the same sort of debater, data-driven argumentation approach to be very compelling about a thing they don't care about, and I'm not making value judgments either way, but if a board doesn't care a hoot about climate change or whatever, and you have just fantastic statistics about the carbon emissions of a thing and how this pathway will be so much better, you may have proven that point excellently in terms of that. That's a rock solid logical approach, but you haven't hit upon a thing that they're emotionally invested in. You're not going to be successful in your attempt to influence.
100%. You know, Pete, you've taken me back to 2018 when I went to Hiroshima, Japan for 18 months to make another semiconductor factory have increased level of diversity. So, Japan obviously had a huge amount of skill shortage. I mean, still does, but that was becoming a huge issue at that time. And this factory was originally owned by Japanese owners, but an American company took over. And they soon realized that if we don't get more foreigners working here, if we don't get more women working here, and if we don't get younger people working in here, so it's diversity of three different lenses, we're not going to have any people and the factory will have to shut down. So there was this whole proposition. Imagine, right, that homogeneous culture of Japan, this proposition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and everyone used to just kind of roll their eyes and they were like, yeah, whatever. And I have this vivid memory of one conversation between two senior leaders that I just happened to hear, who said, great, now we can make a compelling case of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we still don't get what's its connection to the performance. And I realized, oh my God, like what they really care about is the performance of the factory. And then we had to find a way to connect the DEI proposition to the performance of the company. And when we started to kind of figure how diversity, equity, and inclusion will help the performance of the company, every boardroom eye was curious, eager, willing, because it connected with them, right? And there was a direct correlation. We just needed to surface that and anchor the story in that.
I think I've learned that lesson a few times in terms of, no, this is what you should care about. This is what is right and good and proper. Like that really falls flat. It's like, okay, well, now I feel judged and I guess I don't. So I am bad. And I'm thinking about another manufacturing situation. I was once doing a Myers-Briggs training for some executives. I was very excited because we had these executives. There was their big meeting where they had flown in from multiple continents. And I was a part of it. It's like, oh, wow, I feel like I'm big time now. Kind of early on when I was independent in my career. And they had this situation. They manufactured like sausage casings. And apparently there was one of their major production facilities, was having a real big problem at the moment where there were sausages exploding left and right, which I thought was sort of a funny thing to imagine. Oh, another exploding hot dog. And so, so they were all kind of consumed with this mentally. And I was like, isn't that kind of a manufacturing issue? You should just kind of let them handle. Like, this is like your big executive meeting. This seems weird. And I feel inconvenienced because I've trucked it out here and I'm fired up and ready to go. And I thought it was so brilliant the way their VP of Human Resources reframed it for me. She says, this stuff here that we're doing is important. And I really want to make sure that the whole team has all of their attention and focus on this as opposed to this manufacturing issue. So it'd be great if you could come back in 2 hours and then we'll have it as sorted as it can be. And we'll be able to give you all of our attention. I thought, this woman is a master. Because I'm annoyed, I'm frustrated, I don't like rescheduling the thing. I'm fired up, energized, perfectly caffeinated, raring to go. But then she turned it around to the thing that I cared about was having a productive, engaged, transformational session. And how, if you just do this thing that we want, then you'll get that. And I heard a quote, which I love, which said, diplomacy is the art of letting other people have it your way. And I was like, okay, yeah, she just did that to me. And we had a great session and the sausage factory, I guess, got sorted out all as well. And so you nailed it. Like if you are making a super airtight logical case about a thing they don't care about, you're not going to get very far.
And the tricky part is to really figure out what do they care about. Because in your head, you can think, oh, of course, everybody should care about DEI and climate change. And, it affects our planet. And yeah, sure, everybody should. But tomorrow morning, when they get a call from their boss, nobody's going to ask them about the diversity level. They're going to ask about where are we sitting in terms of performance, right? Like even with the whole ESG bit, right? I have to be very honest. Every time I work on a narrative and we come to the S part, which is the social impact part, the reason why the teams are really motivated is when they recognize that they're not going to get investors if they don't work on this. So in some ways, it is an institutionalized, forced change. So how good it is that we have to think about diversity under social impact of ESG, the S part, because now if we don't have a good ESG report, we're not going to get investors. So it's like, there's this term I heard many years ago, intrusion of inclusion, like you really make sure that it happens by systematically creating things that are institutionalized. You cannot escape those. So I think more and more that I do this work, more and more I realize that yes, we all want to be good, but what we're worried about is just getting through today. And if we want to get through today in the way the ecosystem is built, then we have to really find the right framing and the right positioning and the right target of the story, or else it would fall on deaf ears.
Okay, so understood. And so we have a huge distinction about, are we trying to inspire or influence? And we got to really get after a thing that they care about. So can you walk us through sort of step by step, or what are the key actions or processes we go through in order to do just that?
Yeah, so I'll pick it up from before. So you sort of think influence, inspire. You think, okay, I need a story that I can anchor on time, image, money, or I need a story that can actually invite them to have a nudge to the new identity. Now, here's one thing I want people to remember is that for a very long time, what we have understood for storytelling to be is either a marketer's take or a very big sort of stage sort of style of storytelling. But when you are standing in the boardroom, the kind of storytelling that works in corporation has to have a little bit of a journalistic take into it. So my invitation to all people who work within, who are actually trying to use stories in day-to-day work is to have a slightly journalistic take of storytelling. Now, let me elaborate this for you and then I will demonstrate for you. So what do journalists do, right? They go into the ground, they find the stories, and then they bring them out, and then they tell you, and then they make a point or whatever is happening, they bring that out into the open. They bring it out to the surface, right? Now, a lot of people will try to find stories on the internet from TED Talks and try to tell all these really big type of stories, which will never work. Journalistic storytelling requires for you to actually get your hands dirty, go into the grounds, in the coal face, and actually find stories that can actually help you make a point that you want to make. Or sometimes they even change the point you want to make, right? You think that's the point you want to make. And when you start having those conversations with people on the ground, you realize, oh my God, what I thought was all along wrong. So here's an example of a journalistic story. So once I've said that my audience are inspirational, so I will say, you are the workers in this factory that are going to become a smart factory. I invite you to become the supervisors of robots. Now, at this stage, they'll be like, so it's relevant for them, but it's not yet resonant for them, right? It's okay. Here's something for me. You've opened with that positioning. I like it. But tell me more, right? It's not going to stop at that. A nudge to the new identity is the beginning of it. Then, when you tell the story, here's the story I found from the ground, and I built it for a CEO president, and he told. Now, what do I mean by being supervisors of robots? Now, many of you in the audience today actually work within the factory, helping with taking things from one end of the factory to the other end of the factory. Let's take Maria, for example. Maria has been with our company for about 8 years now, and Maria's in the audience. And when she joined us 8 years ago, her job was to take a trolley, put in the semiconductor chips, and move them from one area to the other area. Now, this may sound simple, but we all know this is a highly sensitive product and it has to be done very, very carefully. So it takes time, and she moves the products carefully to the other side and downloads them for whatever other activity that needs to be done with them before they're ready. Now, when she joined us 8 years ago, she would, on an average, do 8 rounds in an 8-hour shift. She'd go from here to there, about eight rounds or so. Now, today, it's the same Maria, it's the same factory, but she's having to do many more ups and downs, close to 24 ups and downs in a day. That's 3 times more. Why is that? Because the demand for semiconductor chips has increased. Semiconductor chips are everywhere, right? In our passports, there's a semiconductor chip. When there is a finger scan somewhere, there's a semiconductor chip. Everywhere, they're everywhere. So the demand increases, our workload increases. Our workload increases, we are not allowed to have a bigger factory. We are not allowed to hire more people. Within the same factory size, within the same number of people, Maria is now being asked to do a lot more. And this trend of more and more and more and more will not stop. So what are we going to do? What we're going to do is we're going to tell Maria to stop doing this work of picking up products from one end and moving them to the other end. Instead, we're going to get an AGV vehicle, which is like a robot, to do that. And Maria's job is going to be the supervisor of that vehicle and make sure that it is rostered, it's charged, it does the work that it does. Now, this is a journalistic style of storytelling, right? Because I've gone and found it on the ground. And when people are listening to this story, they're going, yeah, exactly. That happens to me all the time. I have to move things so many more number of times. Like, I'm a human. How much more can I do? It reminds them of their own experience. So the resonance starts to happen here. The positioning and the anchoring of supervisor of robots brings relevance. It does not bring resonance. It's when the combination of relevance and resonance happens, influence takes place. So what is journalistic about it? Journalistic is that I didn't get that story by just sitting in the boardroom and having a conversation. I got the story because I went on the ground, I chatted to people. Talk to me about your day-to-day work, right? I can't even tell these people, tell me a story, because if you ask people, tell me a story, then people think that I'm asking them to be Clint Eastwood. So you have to have a very specific style of getting moments out of them and then be able to sense make and put them into a structured way and give people who work in these organizations who need to inspire or influence people a language which will move people into the right direction. Now, this is not a story which will make people go, wow, what a story. What this would definitely do, it'll remind many of those people who are sitting in the audience going, that's exactly what happens to me. That is so true. That is so true doesn't mean it's factual. What it means it resonates with me.
That's good. And I like that journalistic frame because that helps a lot with regard to we're not trying to blow minds necessarily by making like a James Cameron epic film situation. So it's not the Hollywood style, nor are we trying to be sort of the great American novel style, but we're being journalistic and just the same way that we have a fascinating, riveting, impactful sort of news article or documentary. That's kind of what we're going for here with regard to our actions, our discovery, our presentation. And we can feel great about the success if they are nudged toward that identity, as opposed to they are telling everybody they have to check out your YouTube channel. So that's a great lens, the journalistic lens. Tell us, do you have any top do's or don'ts in terms of executing this in practice?
I think the first thing is that whenever you stand in front of your audience and you start speaking, you have to have earned the right to be there. This is not, I'll get GPT to come up with something for me. I mean, of course, you can take GPT's help to refine it. But the moment I start speaking about Maria's story, straight away, the audience know that I have done the due diligence of going to them at the cold face, chatting to people and finding out what's going on, right? So I always say to people that don't sit in the boardroom and just don't chat there. Don't think you know what it is. Get down and talk to people and figure out. I think that's the first thing. The second thing I would say to you is that please relieve yourself from the pressure of trying to come across as an amazing storyteller, because people are not interested in fact, if you get told that you're an amazing storyteller, then that's the wrong outcome of your communication. What you have to be able to hear from people is, you made a very relevant point. I'm going to do what you said. I think that makes a lot of sense. Moving people in the right direction to take an action is a better judge of how effective you were versus the claps that you get and versus how you get. If you get complimented on your being an amazing storyteller, that means the focus was you and your flamboyancy, not the point you made. So if someone says to you, what an amazing storyteller you were, like, thank you. What did you get out of that? Like, do you think you're going to take the action I was asking for? Figure that out. So don't feel that pressure. And I think the third thing I would say to you is, when looking for a story, yes, you have to be journalistic, but also remember the kind of story that works in a corporate space is a story that happens all the time. In other words, a high frequency story, not a low frequency story. So pilot lands a plane in Hudson River has happened, right? But if I told that story in a corporate boardroom, then people would be like, that's great, never going to happen to me, right? But if I told a story about us not using a tool that we have to update our learning and development plan, and then not getting the promotion that we wanted because on the dashboard, it didn't seem like you were updating that. So people didn't know you've done all these things, all these courses and workshops, etc. Then a lot of people will go, oh my God, that happens to me all the time. So high frequency, the founder of Google said this, if you can find a problem that people face multiple times a day, you have $1 billion business. Now, when you take that saying and put it into the world of storytelling, if you can find a story, the problem that you talk about in that story, people experience many times, you have a story that will resonate a lot. So resonance is more important than remarkability of a story. So don't pressurize yourself with trying to find a story that is amazing, because most likely that'll get you claps, but will not get you the action. So look for a story that happens all the time. So I think those three are probably practical ones to follow.
That's really doing the trick. And you've finally put to words why I get a little bit skeptical, and I don't tend to dig presentations or stories that lean a lot on legends of business. Like, here's what they do at Amazon and at Disney and Netflix, and Steve Jobs, said and did this. It's like, yeah, okay, sure, these people are genius, high performers, and they did a cool thing, and maybe there's some things we can learn from that. But it doesn't resonate with me much. And I think it's for these exact reasons. One, they haven't journalistically done the work to see what are we actually struggling with here. And secondly, their low frequency matters. Like, yes, introducing the iPhone was really cool. That was a historic technological moment. And that happened. And now it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think it's just, resonance only happens with things that happen all the time, because those are our daily experiences, things that kind of resonate with us. Yeah, I mean, like we love Steve Jobs and we love his ability to orate, but it's available, but it's not accessible. His style is available for us to view, but it's not accessible for us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
we can.
Just be like Steve Jobs, guys. That's all it takes. Come on.
What's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the hyper target. And so everything we've spoken about is about that hyper targetness of the story, right? Really looking at it from that lens of critically thinking it through and really trying to understand that it's so easy to become a victim to this big style storytelling, right? When I was born or when I started my career, oh my gosh, it's like nobody really cares about that, right? Only your mom's really interested in listening to what happened to you, but people don't really care about that.
Big thanks to Anjali for sharing her wisdom with us. Big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Earthbreeze. I recently saw a spooky documentary about the avalanche of plastic we throw away or try to recycle, but doesn't really get recycled. So I've been trying to cut back. And the most delightful way I've been cutting back has been foregoing those huge laundry detergent bottles for Earthbreeze detergent sheets. Earthbreeze detergent comes in convenient plastic-free packaging, so they're more eco-friendly than traditional detergent. And I just love how quick and easy and portable they are. I can keep some loaded in my suitcase for an Airbnb or travel laundry emergency. I'm ready. And I save a good 20 seconds of carefully trying to pour and measure liquid detergent into the machine by tossing a quick and easy sheet in there. I love their scent-free version, which is easy on my clothes and skin. So check out Earthbreeze for an easy way to get clean clothes without all the plastic waste. And get 40% off with your subscription at earthbreeze.com/awesome. That's earthbreeze.com/awesome. One sponsor to check out is Acorns. If you've got a New Year's resolution to save more money this 2025, don't be among the 92% who fail. Become awesome at saving your money with Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing, so your money has a chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you invest with the spare money you've got right now. You can start with $5 or even just your spare change. And it doesn't take much time at all. I find the Acorns site and app to be beautiful, easy, convenient. NerdWallet rates them excellently, and so do I. So head over to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And a little disclosure here, paid on client endorsement, compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Now could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
I can never say the full thing because it's really long, but I'll tell you which one it is and you'll be able to find it very easily. I think there's this quote where it sort of says, when you lose the grip, you slip into a masterpiece, which I really, really like. And the reason why I love that quote so much is because after, working in this space for more than a decade, my style in the beginning of working was very systematic. It was very structured and it's very effort filled. And then came a point somewhere, 3-4 years ago, where that system, that structure was like that intentional approach was so embedded in me that if I sort of knew the direction, I could kind of maneuver within that. But that's the only path. But to become effortless, you have to put in the effort first. And, telling someone who's just like a couple of years into a certain domain, a specific domain, to just lose that grip is not the right thing. But I think there comes a point where you start experiencing the magic of all that is in your subconscious, all that is embedded. So I think that's one of my favorite quotes, to put in so much effort into what you do that it becomes so effortless.
Beautiful. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
So if you are interested in storytelling, learning how to be better at it in a corporate space, the thing that helped me gain mastery in that more than reading, writing was actually a system for success that actually forced me to do the necessary work in this space. If you want to gain mastery, then make a decision on what are you going to not just do, which is within you, but how are you going to put yourself out in the world in that domain. When you do that, you actually start becoming really, really good at it, whether it's a video, whether it's a blog every week, whether it's a like a little thing you'll come up with. If mastery in this domain is your aspiration, then a promise to the world that I will show up in this manner every week is what you need to do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anjali, this was wonderful. I wish you many beautiful stories.
Thank you for having me and having this wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed how quickly you grasped everything I talked about, distilled it, and repeated it back to me, which was really nice.
I love so much of Anjali's perspective on how being told that you were amazing, your story was so great, and that was so cool and so wonderful isn't the end goal. And in fact, that might at times be counterproductive, but instead you want to really zero in on something that is super relatable. And in so doing, makes it more likely to provoke action. So much good stuff from Anjali. If you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced, please pay us a visit at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP1029. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Work takes up most of your time. That's why you should use Stamps.com to save time with your mailing and shipping, and have flexibility to focus on more important things. Stamps.com can handle all your mailing and shipping needs with rates up to 88% off USPS and UPS. Add flexibility to your day with Stamps.com. Go to Stamps.com/program to sign up for a special offer. No contract, cancel anytime. That's Stamps.com/program.